The dust rose in lazy spirals from the hooves of Katherine Anders' borrowed mare as she rode into Marysvale, Utah Territory, on that scorching July morning in 1883. Her throat parched, and her resolve wavering with each mile that separated her from everything she had ever known. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, carrying nothing but 2 carpetbags, a worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a letter of introduction from Reverend Matthews to the small congregation that desperately needed someone to lead their hymns. The Reverend had painted a picture of opportunity, of a growing settlement that valued culture and faith in equal measure. Katherine had imagined a quaint church with whitewashed walls and stained glass windows. What she found instead was a ramshackle collection of weathered buildings clustered around a single dusty street that looked like it might blow away in a strong wind. The general store stood to her left, its porch sagging under the weight of too many harsh winters. Across from it, a saloon called the Silver Dollar promised whiskey and entertainment. A blacksmith's hammer rang out somewhere behind the main buildings, and the acrid smell of coal smoke hung in the still air. A few faces turned to watch her pass, curious and wary in equal measure. Women were scarce enough in these parts, and a woman arriving alone on horseback was bound to attract attention. Katherine guided her horse toward what appeared to be a church, though calling it such seemed generous. The small wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, its bell tower empty of any bell. The cross mounted above the door tilted at an angle that suggested either haste in construction or indifference to precision. Still, it was her destination, and she had nowhere else to go. Her savings had been depleted by the journey west, and the small stipend the church had promised would barely keep her fed if she was careful. She dismounted with less grace than she would have liked, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle. A woman emerged from the church, wiping her hands on an apron that might have been white once, but now bore the permanent stains of frontier life. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face weathered by wind and worry. "You must be Miss Anders," the woman called out, her voice carrying a note of relief. "We got word you were coming. I am Martha Hendricks. My husband serves as the lay preacher here when we can convince him to put down his ledgers long enough to deliver a sermon." Katherine managed a smile despite her exhaustion. "I am pleased to meet you, Mrs. Hendricks. The journey was longer than I anticipated." "They always are," Martha said, taking one of Katherine's bags without asking. "Come inside where it is cooler. Well, less hot anyway." Nothing stays cool in July except the water from the deep well, and even that is questionable. The interior of the church was dim and sparse. Rough-hewn benches served as pews, arranged in 2 rows with a narrow aisle between them. The altar was a simple wooden table covered with a faded cloth. No piano stood in the corner, no organ to accompany the hymns. Katherine felt her heart sink a little further. "I know it is not much," Martha said, noting her expression, "but the people here are good folk for the most part. They work hard, and they appreciate the little touches of civilization we can provide. Your predecessor left nearly 2 years ago to marry a merchant in Salt Lake City. Since then, our services have been rather quiet affairs." "I will do my best," Katherine said, setting down her remaining bag. "When is the next service?" "Sunday morning, naturally. 3 days from now. That should give you time to settle in. You will be staying with me and Harold. We have a spare room. It is small, but it is clean, and you will have some privacy." Katherine nodded, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you. I truly appreciate your hospitality." "No need for thanks. We are happy to have you. A proper singer will make all the difference. There are some in town who have stopped attending services altogether, saying there is nothing to lift the spirit without music." Martha paused, studying Katherine with shrewd eyes. You do have a good voice, do not you? The letter said you trained in church choirs back east. I have been singing since I was old enough to stand in the choir loft, Katherine assured her. My mother was a singer, and she taught me everything she knew before she passed. I am sorry for your loss. How long ago? 6 months. The words still hurt to say. 6 months since consumption had stolen the last of her family, leaving Katherine alone in a city that suddenly felt too crowded and too empty all at once. My father died when I was young. It was always just my mother and me. Martha's expression softened. Then you know what it is to start over. That is what most folks here are doing. Starting over, running from something, or looking for something they could not find elsewhere. You will fit right in. They left the church and walked down the street toward a house that looked sturdier than most of the other buildings. Harold Hendricks proved to be a nervous, thin man who kept meticulous books for the few businesses in town, and spoke mostly in numbers and percentages. He welcomed Katherine with distracted courtesy before returning to his ledgers. The spare room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. But it had a window that looked out toward the mountains to the east, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. Katherine unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 good dresses on pegs driven into the wall and arranging her hairbrush and hand mirror on the washstand. The room felt temporary, like a way station rather than a home, but she was too tired to care. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town settling down for the night, Katherine wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. St. Louis had been her whole world. She knew its streets, its rhythms, its dangers and delights. This place was alien to her, harsh and unforgiving. But there was nothing waiting for her back east except memories and an empty apartment she could no longer afford. She had to make this work. There were no other options. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Martha introduced her to the members of the congregation, a collection of shopkeepers, ranchers, miners, and their families. Most were welcoming enough, if reserved. They were waiting to see if she would prove worth the effort of bringing her all the way from Missouri. Katherine chose hymns she knew by heart, songs that spoke of faith and hope and perseverance. She practiced in the empty church, her voice echoing off the bare walls, filling the space with something it had lacked for too long. Saturday evening, as she was rehearsing one final time, the church door creaked open. Katherine stopped mid-verse and turned to see a tall man silhouetted against the fading light. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with gray despite what appeared to be a relatively young face. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I heard the singing from outside. Did not mean to disturb you." "You are not disturbing me," Katherine said, though her heart was beating faster than it should. There was something about the way he stood there, hesitant and awkward, that suggested he did not often venture into churches. "I was just preparing for tomorrow's service. Will you be attending?" "Probably not," he admitted. "I do not come to town much, just needed supplies. Thought I would stop by and see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That someone had finally come to bring some music back to this place. I could hear you from down the street. You have a beautiful voice, miss." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. That is very kind of you to say." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation but unwilling to leave. "I am Kade Garrett. I have a ranch about 8 miles north of here. Raise cattle mostly, some horses. Katherine Anders. I arrived earlier this week from St. Louis." "That is quite a journey. What brings you all the way out here? It was a reasonable question, but Katherine found herself reluctant to share the whole truth with this stranger. I needed a change, and the church here needed a song leader. It seemed like Providence. Kade nodded slowly, as if he understood there was more to the story but respected her privacy enough not to pry. Well, I hope it works out for you. This is a good town, mostly. People here look out for each other when times get tough. Do you ever attend services, Mr. Garrett? The question seemed to surprise him. He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. Used to, years ago. Have not been much for church lately. Lost my wife and baby son in childbirth 3 years back. Had a hard time finding my faith after that. The raw pain in his voice made Katherine's throat tighten. I am so sorry. That must have been unbearable. It was what it was. You learn to keep going because stopping means giving up, and giving up means the emptiness wins. He looked up at her, and in the dim light of the church, his eyes held a depth of sadness that Katherine recognized from her own reflection. Anyway, I should let you get back to your practicing. Just wanted to say hello and welcome you to Marysvale. If you need anything at all, the general store knows how to reach me. I come to town once a month for supplies. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. That is very kind. He nodded, put his hat back on, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Maybe I will come tomorrow. To hear you sing proper, I mean. It has been a long time since I have heard anything that sounded like heaven. Then he was gone, leaving Katherine alone in the church with her pounding heart and a confusion of emotions she had not expected to feel. She had come here to start over, to find purpose in service and solace in song. She had not come looking for anything more than that. Yet something about the lonely rancher and his quiet grief had touched her in a way she could not quite name. Sunday morning dawned bright and hot, the sun already fierce by the time Katherine walked to the church with Martha and Harold. The building filled slowly, families arriving in wagons and on horseback, dressed in their best clothes despite the heat. Katherine stood near the front, her heart fluttering with nerves she had not felt since her first solo as a girl. This mattered in a way those childhood performances had not. These people needed something from her, something more than just pleasant music to pass the time. Harold delivered a short sermon about perseverance and faith, reading from the book of Joshua. His voice was reedy and uncertain, and Katherine could see a tension wavering among the congregation. Then he nodded to her, and she stood, smoothing her pale blue dress and taking a breath that seemed to reach all the way down to her soul. She began with amazing grace, letting her voice start soft and sweet, then building with each verse. She had been told more than once that her voice had an unusual quality to it, something that bypassed the ears and went straight to the heart. Her mother had called it a gift from God. Katherine had never been sure about that, but she knew that when she sang, she forgot herself completely and became nothing but the music. The church fell utterly silent except for her voice. Even the children stopped fidgeting. Katherine closed her eyes and let the hymn carry her, each note clear and true, rising and falling like prayer itself. When she finished, there was a long moment of stillness before someone in the back said a quiet amen. They sang 3 more hymns together, the congregation following her lead with varying degrees of enthusiasm and pitch accuracy. But it did not matter that they were not perfect. What mattered was that they were trying, that they were lifting their voices together, and that for a brief hour, the harshness of frontier life fell away, and they were connected to something larger than themselves. After the service, people crowded around to shake her hand and thank her. An older woman with tears on her cheeks hugged her without asking permission. A grizzled miner told her she sang like an angel. Martha beamed with pride as if Katherine's success reflected well on her own judgment. Through it all, Katherine found herself searching the faces for one in particular. But Kade Garrett was not there. The disappointment she felt was disproportionate to their brief conversation the night before, and she chided herself for being foolish. He had said he might come, not that he would. A man who had lost his faith was not easily coaxed back into a church, no matter how pleasant the music. She helped Martha prepare Sunday dinner, grateful for the distraction of work. They roasted a chicken and boiled potatoes and carrots from Martha's kitchen garden. Harold joined them, unusually talkative, pleased with how well the service had gone. They were just sitting down to eat when there was a knock at the door. Harold answered it and returned with a puzzled expression. "Miss Anders, there is someone here to see you." Katherine set down her napkin and went to the door, her stomach fluttering with an anticipation she did not want to examine too closely. Kade Garrett stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Mr. Garrett," she said, surprised, "I did not see you at the service." "I was there," he said, "in the back, left before the crowd gathered. I am not good with crowds these days." "Oh, I see. I wanted to tell you that your singing was the most beautiful thing I have heard in longer than I can remember. It reminded me of something I thought I had lost for good." Katherine's throat felt tight. What was that? Hope, I suppose. The sense that there might still be good things in the world worth paying attention to. He looked down at his hat, then back up at her. "I know this is forward, and you do not know me from Adam, but would you consider coming out to my ranch sometime? To see it, I mean. It is a pretty place, especially in the early morning or late evening when the light hits the mountains just right." "I do not think that would be proper, Mr. Garrett. I have only just arrived and people will talk." "Of course. You are right. I apologize. That was inappropriate of me." He started to turn away, and Katherine felt something twist in her chest. "Mr. Garrett, wait. Perhaps if Mrs. Hendricks could accompany me." "Would that be acceptable?" He turned back, and for the first time something like a smile touched his weathered face. "That would be more than acceptable. Next Sunday after the service, I could bring the wagon to make the journey easier." "Next Sunday," Katherine agreed, wondering what on earth she was doing but unable to bring herself to take back the words. After he left, Martha appeared at her elbow. "That is Kade Garrett. He owns one of the larger spreads north of here. Good man, by all accounts, though he has been living like a hermit since his wife died. I have not seen him in town this often in 3 years. You have made quite an impression, it seems." "He just wants to show me his ranch," Katherine said, though even to her own ears it sounded like she was trying to convince herself of something. "If you say so, dear. But I will warn you, people will talk whether I go along as chaperone or not. Frontier communities are small, and entertainment is scarce. A handsome widower showing interest in the new church singer will be the topic of conversation for weeks." Katherine returned to the dinner table feeling unsettled. She had come here to start a new life, to find peace in service and music. Romance had not been part of the plan, yet she could not deny the pull she felt toward the sad-eyed rancher who heard heaven in her voice. The week passed slowly. Katherine spent her days helping Martha with household chores, visiting members of the congregation, and practicing her hymns. She taught a children's choir on Wednesday afternoon, a ragtag group of 7 youngsters who ranged from enthusiastic to sullen. By the end of the session, she had them mostly singing together, their high, sweet voices filling the church with something like joy. In the evenings, she sat on the Hendricks porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible in their intensity. The landscape here was so different from St. Louis, vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made her heart ache. She understood why people came west despite the hardships. There was something about all this space that made you believe you could be anyone, do anything, start completely fresh. On Saturday, Martha helped her choose which dress to wear for the ranch visit. The green one brings out your eyes. And wear your bonnet, or you will burn like paper in this sun. You are making too much of this, Katherine protested, though she took care with her appearance in a way she would not have for a simple social call. Perhaps, but there is no harm in looking your best. Kade Garrett is a good man, Katherine. He deserves some happiness after what he has been through. So do you think I am meant to provide that happiness? We have barely spoken. Martha gave her a knowing look. Sometimes that is how it happens. My mother always said you know someone is special when they make you feel more like yourself instead of less. Think about how you feel around him. Katherine did think about it, though she was not sure she liked what she discovered. Around Kade, she felt nervous and alive in equal measure, as if the air itself had changed composition. She had felt nothing like it during her courtship with Thomas Brennan back in St. Louis, a passionless affair that had ended when his family decided she was not of sufficient social standing. She had been hurt but not heartbroken, which had told her everything she needed to know about the depth of her feelings. Sunday's service went even better than the first. More people attended, drawn by word of mouth about the singer from St. Louis. Katherine led them through hymns old and new, her voice soaring in the small space. She saw Kade again in the back row, his presence both comforting and distracting. When their eyes met across the church, something passed between them that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with recognition. Two lonely souls finding each other in an unlikely place. After the service, Kade waited outside with his wagon while Katherine changed out of her good dress into the green one Martha had suggested. She felt ridiculously nervous, like a girl preparing for her first dance. Martha climbed into the wagon beside her, and Kade took up the reins with easy confidence. The journey north took them past several smaller ranches and homesteads, each carved out of the harsh landscape through sheer determination and backbreaking work. Children played in dusty yards while women hung laundry and men tended to animals. Everyone waved as they passed, and Kade returned the gestures with nods of acknowledgement. "How long have you lived out here?" Katherine asked, needing to fill the silence. "About 8 years. Came from Colorado after working on other people's ranches for most of my 20s. Saved every penny I could and bought this land when the previous owner decided to try his luck in California. It was rough at first, just a falling down cabin and more sagebrush than grass. But I worked it, improved it, built a proper house when I married Rachel." His voice caught slightly on his late wife's name. "She only got to enjoy it for 2 years before she passed. You manage the ranch alone. I have 2 hired hands who live in the old bunkhouse. Brothers from Texas named Jim and Samuel Worth. Good workers, decent men. They keep to themselves mostly, which suits me fine." The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. Katherine caught her breath at the sight. A sturdy 2-story house with a covered porch stood amid a cluster of outbuildings. Behind it, mountains rose in shades of purple and blue, their peaks touching the sky. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and horses moved in a fenced corral near the barn. It was beautiful in a spare, unadorned way, a testament to hard work and careful planning. "Oh, Mr. Garrett," Katherine said softly. "It is lovely." He glanced at her, and she saw pleasure in his eyes at her reaction. "It is home. Come, let me show you around." He helped both women down from the wagon with careful courtesy. Martha settled herself on the porch with a knowing smile, making it clear she would serve as chaperone only in the loosest sense of the word. Kade offered Katherine his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked toward the barn first, where horses whinnied at their approach. Kade introduced her to his breeding stock, talking about bloodlines and temperaments with the ease of someone discussing old friends. Katherine knew nothing about horses beyond the basics, but she loved watching his face as he spoke. The sadness lifted when he talked about his ranch, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. "I have a mare that foaled last month," he said, leading her to a stall at the end of the barn. "Want to see?" Inside, a chestnut mare stood protectively over a gangly foal with oversized ears and liquid dark eyes. Katherine laughed with delight. "Oh, he is precious." Kade corrected. "And she is trouble already, getting into everything. But she will be a beauty when she grows into those legs." They stood side by side, watching the foal nurse, and Katherine became acutely aware of Kade's presence beside her. He was a tall man, easily a head taller than she was, and he smelled of leather and horses and sun-warmed cotton. When he moved slightly closer, she did not step away. "Can I ask you something, Miss Anders?" "Of course. And please call me Katherine." "Katherine, then. You can call me Kade." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Why did you really come out here? Martha says you had a life in St. Louis, training and connections. This is not an easy place for a woman alone." Katherine considered deflecting, giving him the same answer she had given everyone else. But something about the way he looked at her, patient and genuinely interested, made her want to tell the truth. "My mother died 6 months ago," she began. "She was all I had left in the world. After she passed, I found myself in a city full of people but completely alone. I kept singing in the church choir because that was what I had always done, but it felt hollow. One day, Reverend Matthews mentioned this position, and I thought perhaps a fresh start would help. Perhaps getting away from all the memories would make it easier to breathe. Has it? I do not know yet. Some days I think I made a terrible mistake. Other days, like today, I think perhaps this is exactly where I am supposed to be." Kade nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. After Rachel died, I thought about selling everything and moving on. But I realized I was not running towards something better, just away from the pain. And pain travels with you no matter where you go, so I stayed and tried to make peace with it. Have you succeeded? Some days better than others. Keeping busy helps. The ranch gives me purpose, even if it does not give me much joy anymore." He looked at her directly, his eyes intense. "Until I heard you sing, I had forgotten what joy even felt like." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "Kade, I am not sure what you want from me." "I am not sure either," he admitted. "But I know that when I heard your voice in that church, something woke up inside me that I thought was dead forever. I would like to get to know you better if you are willing. No expectations, no promises. Just two lonely people finding some comfort in each other's company." It was the most honest proposition Katherine had ever received. No flowery declarations, no false promises of eternal devotion. Just simple human truth. She should have said no. She should have protected her heart, kept her distance, focused on the work she had come here to do, but she found herself nodding instead. "I would like that too." His smile was like sunrise, slow and warming. "Good. Then let me show you the rest of the place." They walked the property for another hour, Kade pointing out improvements he had made and plans for future expansion. He introduced her to his hired hands, who regarded her with curious but respectful expressions. Jim Worth was the younger brother, probably in his mid-20s, with an easy smile and a Texas drawl. Samuel was older, quieter, with the look of someone who had seen hard times and survived them. "Miss Anders is the new singer at the church in town," Kade explained. "She has a voice that could make angels weep." "We would not know much about church singing," Jim said with a grin. "But if the boss says it is good, then it must be something special. He has not invited anyone out here since the missus passed." Samuel elbowed his brother hard in the ribs, and Jim's smile faltered. "Sorry, boss. Did not mean to bring up painful subjects." "It is all right," Kade said, though Katherine saw the shadow cross his face. "Rachel would want me to move forward, not stay locked in the past forever." They returned to the house for coffee and fresh bread that Kade admitted Martha had baked and sent along with him the day before. The interior of the house was neat but sparse, clearly the domain of a man who spent little time indoors. A few photographs sat on the mantel, including one of a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile. Rachel, Katherine assumed, feeling an unexpected pang of jealousy toward a dead woman. "She was beautiful," Katherine said, studying the photograph. "She was," Kade agreed. "And kind. She deserved better than to die so young trying to bring our son into the world." "Did he have a name?" "Joseph. We never got to use it, but it was the name we had chosen." He turned away from the mantel, his jaw tight. "I am sorry. I do not usually talk about this. Do not apologize. Grief is not something we should have to hide." He looked at her then with such raw vulnerability that Katherine had to look away. "You understand, don't you, what it is like to lose everything that matters?" "I do," she said softly. "After my mother died, I felt like I was walking through fog. Nothing seemed real or solid. I kept expecting to wake up and find it had all been a nightmare. Does it get easier?" "Not easier exactly. But it gets different. The sharp edges dull a bit, and you learn to carry it without it dragging you under." They stood in silence for a long moment, two people who understood pain in ways they wished they did not have to. Outside, Martha called that she was getting hungry, breaking the spell. Kade blinked and seemed to come back to himself. "I should get you both back to town before it gets too late. The road can be tricky in the dark, especially if you are not used to it." The ride back to Marysvale passed in comfortable quiet. Katherine sat beside Kade this time, while Martha dozed in the back of the wagon. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting everything in shades of gold. Kade's arm pressed against Katherine's as they swayed with the wagon's movement, and she found herself noticing small details about him. The way his hands held the reins with easy competence. The slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had smiled more in the past than he did now. The way he glanced at her when he thought she was not looking, his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. When they reached the Hendricks house, Kade helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming today. It meant more to me than you probably realize. Thank you for inviting me. Your ranch is truly beautiful, Kade. Come back next Sunday. If you want to, I mean. I will not pressure you if you would rather not." Katherine knew she should probably decline, should put some distance between herself and these unexpected feelings, but she could not make herself say no. "I would like that." The smile that spread across his face made her heart flutter. "Good. I will be here after the service." That night, lying in her small room and listening to the wind whistle past the eaves, Katherine tried to make sense of what was happening. She had come to Marysvale to start a new life focused on faith and service. Instead, she found herself falling for a grieving rancher with sad eyes and careful hands. It was not what she had planned. But then, her mother used to say that God's plans were often different from our own, and sometimes better if we had the courage to follow them. The next weeks fell into a pleasant pattern. Katherine led the Sunday services, her singing drawing larger crowds each week. Some people came from neighboring ranches and homesteads, traveling for an hour or more just to hear her voice. After each service, Kade would be waiting with his wagon to take her and Martha to his ranch for the afternoon. Martha's presence as chaperone became increasingly unnecessary as the weeks passed. But she came along anyway. settling herself on the porch with her knitting while Kade and Katherine walked the property or sat on the corral fence watching the horses. They talked about everything and nothing. Katherine told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother's beautiful voice, and the way she had filled their small apartment with music. She talked about the city's bustle and noise, so different from the vast quiet of Utah Territory. Kade shared stories about his years as a ranch hand in Colorado, the hard lessons learned, and the good men and women he had met along the way. He spoke carefully about Rachel, opening up more as he grew comfortable with Katherine's gentle interest rather than pity. "She was nothing like you," he said one afternoon as they sat by the creek that ran through his property. "I do not mean that as a bad thing. You are just different people. She was quiet where you are expressive. She preferred staying home where you seem curious about everything. But she had a good heart, and she tried to make the best of ranch life even though it was not what she had grown up knowing." "How did you meet?" "Through her father. He owned the ranch next to where I was working in Colorado. Rachel was his only child, and he worried about what would happen to her when he passed. I think he encouraged our courtship because he knew I would take care of her and the land he had built." "Did you love her?" The question was bold, perhaps too bold, but Katherine needed to know. Kade was silent for a long moment, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "I cared for her deeply," he finally said. "And I think I could have loved her more with time, but I am not sure I ever felt for her what I am starting to feel for you." Katherine's breath caught. "Kade, we have only known each other a few weeks." "I know. But you asked for honesty, so I am being honest. When I look at you, Katherine, I feel alive in a way I have not felt in years, maybe never felt before. You make me want to be better, do better, feel better. Is that so terrible?" "No," she whispered. "It is not terrible at all." He reached for her hand and she let him take it. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm and steady. They sat like that until Martha called from the wagon that they should think about starting back before the sun got too low. The town gossip that Martha had predicted came to pass, though it was mostly good-natured. The general store owner's wife told Katherine she was happy to see Kade coming around again. The blacksmith mentioned that the rancher seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. A few of the older women clucked their tongues about proper mourning periods and appropriate behavior, but even their criticism seemed half-hearted, as if they could not quite bring themselves to object to two lonely people finding comfort together. Katherine wrote letters to the few friends she had maintained in St. Louis, trying to explain what her new life was like. It was difficult to capture in words the stark beauty of the landscape, the genuine warmth of most of the people, and the unexpected bloom of feelings for a man she barely knew but felt connected to in ways that defied logic. Her best friend Margaret wrote back with excitement and concern in equal measure, urging Katherine to be careful but also to follow her heart. Summer deepened into the thick heat of August. The creek on Kade's property slowed to a trickle, and dust seemed to coat everything despite the best efforts of the women to keep their homes clean. Katherine's skin tanned despite her bonnet, and her hands grew rougher from helping Martha with endless chores. But she felt healthy and strong in a way she never had in the city, as if the mountain air and physical work agreed with her constitution. One Sunday in late August, after the service and the usual Sunday dinner with Martha and Harold, Kade asked if Katherine would like to see the ranch at sunset. "Just the two of them," he said, with an intensity that suggested this was important. Martha gave her blessing with a meaningful look, and Katherine found herself alone with Kade for the first time since they had met. They rode in his wagon to a spot on his property where the land rose to give a view of the entire valley. The mountains framed the scene like a painting, and the setting sun turned everything to gold and crimson. Kade helped Katherine down and spread a blanket on the ground. They sat side by side, shoulders touching, watching the light change. "I have been thinking," Kade said after a long silence, "about what I want for the future. For a long time after Rachel and the baby died, I thought I did not want anything except to get through each day. But you have changed that, Katherine. You have made me realize I still have a lot of life left to live, and I want to live it with purpose and joy." Katherine's heart was racing, but she kept her voice calm. "What are you saying, Kade?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I am saying that I know we have not known each other long, but I also know what I feel. I am saying that you are the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I think about before I sleep. I am saying that your voice does not just sound like heaven to me. You are heaven to me, a gift I never expected and do not deserve but want desperately to keep." "Kade," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears. "Let me finish, please. I know you came here to start over, to find purpose in your work at the church. I'm not asking you to give that up. But I am asking if maybe you could build a life here with me too. Not right away if you need time, but someday when you are ready. I want to marry you, Katherine. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my days. I want to hear you sing in our home and build something real and lasting together." A tear spilled down Katherine's cheek. "You want to marry me? More than I have ever wanted anything. I know I am asking a lot. Ranch life is hard, and I cannot promise you comfort or ease. But I can promise you honesty and respect, and all the love I have in me, which is considerable where you are concerned." Katherine thought about all the reasons she should say no or at least ask for more time. They had known each other less than 2 months. She had come here for a purpose that had nothing to do with marriage. There were proprieties to observe, periods to wait. But as she looked into Kade's eyes, so full of hope and vulnerability, she realized that she did not want to say no. She did not want to wait. She wanted exactly what he was offering. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss that followed was gentle and sweet, full of promise rather than passion. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling, and the last light of the sun bathed them in warmth. They told Martha first, who cried and hugged them both and declared she had known from the very first Sunday. Harold offered his congratulations with awkward sincerity and immediately began calculating what a wedding might cost. The news spread through Marysvale like wildfire, and by Monday afternoon, Katherine was receiving visitors at the Hendricks house, women eager to help plan the ceremony and offer advice. They decided to marry in October when the worst of the summer heat had passed, but before winter made travel difficult. Katherine would continue leading the hymns at church services, coming into town each Sunday. It was only 8 miles, an easy journey by wagon. In the meantime, she stayed with the Hendricks and threw herself into preparing for her new life. Kade came to town twice a week instead of once a month, always with some excuse about needing supplies but really just wanting to see Katherine. They walked together in the evenings when the heat had abated, chaperoned by whichever congregation member appointed themselves to the task. They talked about their hopes and dreams for the future. Kade wanted to expand his herd and maybe start breeding horses more seriously. Katherine wanted to establish a proper music program at the church, maybe even teach piano lessons if they could acquire an instrument. "I want children," Kade said one evening, his voice quiet. "I know that might be frightening after what happened to Rachel, but I want to try if you are willing." Katherine had thought about this, about the risks women faced in childbirth, especially out here far from doctors and hospitals. But she had also thought about the alternative, a life without children, and found she did not want that either. "I want children too," she told him. "We will be careful and we will do everything right, but yes, I want to build a family with you." The relief on his face was palpable. He pulled her close, mindful of their chaperone pretending not to watch from a nearby bench, and pressed his forehead to hers. "I will take care of you, Katherine. I swear it. I know you will." September brought cooler temperatures and the first whispers of autumn. Katherine's voice grew stronger with each week of singing, and the church services became events that people planned their Sundays around. She felt herself becoming part of the community in a way she had never been in St. Louis, where she had been just another face in the crowd. Here, people knew her name and her story. They cared about her happiness and her future with Kade. The preparations for the wedding became a community effort. Women sewed Katherine a beautiful dress from fabric Martha special ordered from Salt Lake City. The men built new benches for the church so everyone who wanted to attend could fit inside. The general store owner donated preserves and canned goods to help stock Katherine and Kade's pantry for the winter. It was an outpouring of generosity that moved Katherine to tears more than once. Kade spent his evenings working on the house, painting and repairing, making it perfect for his new bride. He bought a beautiful oak bed frame from a furniture maker in Provo, hauling it back in his wagon with such care that Jim and Samuel teased him mercilessly. He cleaned and organized, throwing out reminders of his previous marriage not out of disrespect, but out of recognition that this was a new beginning. The night before the wedding, Katherine could barely sleep. She lay in her small room at the Hendricks house for the last time, listening to the familiar sounds and thinking about everything that had changed since she arrived in July. She had come here broken and grieving, looking for nothing more than a way to survive. Instead, she had found love and purpose and a home. It seemed too good to be true, and part of her waited for something to go wrong. But the morning dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Martha helped her dress, fussing over every detail until Katherine was certain she had never looked better in her life. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory-colored with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She wore her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she owned that had any value. The church was packed with people when she arrived. The entire town seemed to have turned out, along with ranchers and homesteaders from miles around. Kade stood at the front beside Harold, who would perform the ceremony, and when he saw Katherine, his expression took her breath away. He looked at her as if she was the answer to every prayer he had ever prayed. She walked down the aisle alone, with no one to give her away, but she did not feel alone. The community that had embraced her stood on either side, smiling and nodding encouragement. When she reached Kade, he took her hands in his, and she could feel them trembling slightly. "You are beautiful," he whispered. "You are not so bad yourself," she whispered back, and he smiled. Harold performed a short but heartfelt ceremony, speaking about the importance of companionship and the blessings of love found in unexpected places. When he asked them to exchange their vows, Katherine's voice rang out clear and true, making promises she intended to keep for the rest of her life. Kade's voice was rougher, choked with emotion, but his words were just as sincere. "I promise to honor you and cherish you all my days. I promise to be faithful and true, to work hard to provide for you and any children we may be blessed with. I promise to listen when you sing and to thank God every day that He brought you into my life." When Harold pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed her with a tenderness that made Katherine's eyes fill with tears. The church erupted in applause and cheers. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music filled the air as they walked back down the aisle together, married, embarking on a new life as partners. The celebration that followed was one of the most joyous occasions Marysvale had seen in years. Tables had been set up outside the church laden with food that people had contributed. The fiddler was joined by a man with a banjo, and dancing broke out in the street. Katherine sang for the crowd, hymns and folk songs, and even a few humorous ditties that made people laugh. Kade never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always seeking her face. As the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes and climbed into Kade's wagon, which had been decorated with ribbons and flowers. The journey to the ranch seemed shorter than ever before, perhaps because Katherine was finally going home. The house glowed with lamplight when they arrived. Kade carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that it was an unnecessary tradition. He set her down gently in the front room, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy now that they were alone. "I know this is all very sudden," Kade said. "We do not have to rush anything tonight if you are not ready." Katherine touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under her fingers. "I am ready. I am your wife, Kade. I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way of two people learning each other for the first time. But there was love in every touch, respect in every moment, and when they finally lay together in the big oak bed, Katherine felt more at peace than she had in years. Life on the ranch proved both harder and more rewarding than Katherine had expected. She rose before dawn to help with breakfast, learning to cook on the big iron stove and manage the household, while Kade and his men worked the land and animals. Her hands, already roughened by frontier life, grew calloused from washing and mending and the endless tasks required to keep a home running. But she did not mind. There was satisfaction in work well done, in a clean house and a good meal and clothing mended with neat stitches. Every Sunday, they made the journey into town for church services. Katherine's singing became legendary throughout the region. People spoke of the rancher's wife who sang like an angel, whose voice could move the hardest hearts to tears. Young women sought her out for singing lessons, and Katherine found she enjoyed teaching, passing on the gift her mother had given her. The first winter was hard. Snow came early and stayed late, piling in drifts that reached the windows. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, the world reduced to the house and barn, and the exhausting work of keeping animals alive through bitter cold. But there was beauty in those long winter nights too, sitting by the fire with Kade, reading aloud from the few books they owned or simply talking about everything and nothing. In March, Katherine realized she was pregnant. The joy was tempered by fear, remembering what had happened to Rachel. But Kade held her close and promised they would do everything possible to keep her safe. They brought in a midwife from Marysvale, a month before the baby was due. And when the time came in November of 1884, Katherine labored through a long night with Kade holding her hand and praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. Their son was born as the sun rose, healthy and squalling and perfect. They named him Matthew, and when Katherine held him for the first time, she wept with relief and gratitude and overwhelming love. Kade could barely speak, overcome by the gift of a son after believing he would never have children. "Thank you," he whispered, kissing her forehead as she cradled Matthew. "Thank you for giving me back my future." Matthew was an easy baby, content to sleep in a cradle Kade carved himself, or be passed among the ranch hands who quickly became surrogate uncles. Katherine sang to him constantly, lullabies and hymns and silly songs she made up on the spot. Kade would come in from working and find her rocking the baby, her voice filling the house with music, and he would stand in the doorway just listening, marveling at his good fortune. They weathered hard times along with the good. There was a drought in 1886 that tested their resolve and their finances. A harsh winter in 1887 killed half their cattle, but they endured, supporting each other, finding strength in their partnership. The community rallied around them during tough times, just as they helped others when they could. 2 years after Matthew came a daughter they named Sarah, with Katherine's light hair and Kade's gray eyes. She was more challenging than her brother, colicky and demanding, but Katherine loved her fiercely. Kade doted on his daughter, carrying her around the ranch while he worked, talking to her about everything he was doing as if she could understand. The church in Marysvale grew and prospered, eventually raising enough money for a real bell and even a small organ. Katherine trained a choir of women who sang with her on Sundays, their voices blending in harmonies that filled the valley with praise. The church became known throughout Utah Territory as a place worth visiting, and the town grew as a result, bringing new businesses and families. In 1889, Kade and Katherine's third child was born, another son they named Daniel. With 3 small children and a ranch to run, life became a constant juggling act, but Katherine had never been happier. She had found what she had been looking for when she fled St. Louis, though it was not at all what she had expected. Not just peace or purpose, but joy. Deep, abiding joy that came from loving and being loved, from building something meaningful, from raising children and managing a home and singing praises on Sunday mornings. Kade had changed too. The sad-eyed, grieving man Katherine had first met in the church was gone, replaced by someone lighter, more at ease with himself and the world. He still worked hard and long hours, but he also made time for his family. He taught Matthew to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk. He let Sarah help with ranch chores, her small hands trying to copy everything he did. He read to them at night from the Bible and whatever other books they could acquire, his deep voice bringing the stories to life. As the 1890s began, the ranch was more successful than Kade had ever dreamed. They had hired more men to help with the expanding operation. The house had been added onto twice, with a proper parlor and bedrooms for each child. Katherine had a piano now, purchased with money saved over years, and she taught not just singing but basic music to anyone who wanted to learn. One evening in the spring of 1892, after the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, Kade turned to Katherine with the same intensity he had shown the first time he proposed. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming out here, marrying me, choosing this life over what you might have had in the city?" Katherine considered the question seriously, as she always did with Kade. "Not for a single moment. This life is harder than anything I imagined back in St. Louis. But it is also richer and fuller and more real. I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do." "You were meant to sing," Kade said. "That is your gift." "I was meant to sing," Katherine agreed. "But I was also meant to find you, to build this life with you, to raise our children together. All of it matters. All of it is part of who I am now." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I heard heaven in your voice that first Sunday," he said softly. "But what I did not know then is that you would bring heaven into my life too. Every single day, Katherine, you are my heaven." She tilted her face up to kiss him, this man who had been a stranger 9 years ago and was now the center of her world. "And you are mine." The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. Matthew grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and worked alongside his father from an early age. Sarah proved to have inherited Katherine's musical talent, singing with a pure, sweet voice that brought tears to people's eyes. Daniel was the adventurous one, always exploring and getting into mischief, keeping Katherine constantly worried and entertained in equal measure. In 1895, Katherine found herself pregnant again, a surprise at 36. Kade worried more than he had with the previous pregnancies, but Katherine sailed through with few complications. Their fourth child was another daughter, named Grace, who arrived in early 1896 as Utah was transitioning from territory to state. The new century approached, bringing changes to Marysvale and the entire region. The railroad extended its reach, making travel easier and connecting frontier towns to the wider world. More families arrived, and the rough edges of the settlement slowly smoothed into something more established and civilized. The church grew and eventually hired a permanent pastor, though Katherine remained the choir director and primary soloist. Through it all, Katherine and Kade's love deepened and matured. The passionate intensity of early romance settled into something steadier but no less profound. They were partners in every sense, managing the ranch together, raising their children together, supporting each other through joys and sorrows. They still made the trip into town every Sunday for services, though now with a wagon full of children. Katherine still sang with the same beauty and power that had first captivated Kade all those years ago. On their 20th wedding anniversary, in October 1904, Kade surprised Katherine with a trip to Salt Lake City. They left the children with Jim Worth, who had married and settled nearby, and spent 3 days in the state capital. They attended a concert at the Tabernacle, and Katherine was moved to tears by the professional choir's performance. But afterward, Kade told her that for all their training and polish, they did not move him the way her voice did. "You sing from your soul," he explained as they walked hand in hand through the city streets. "Those singers were technically perfect, but they did not make me feel anything. You make me feel everything." That night in their hotel room, far from the ranch and the daily demands of their life, they made love with the passion of newlyweds and the tenderness of old companions. Afterward, lying in his arms, Katherine reflected on how blessed she had been. She had come to Utah territory running from grief and loss. She had found not just healing but wholeness, not just purpose but passion, not just a home but a true partner. "What are you thinking about?" Kade asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About how strange life is. If my mother had not died, if Reverend Matthews had not mentioned this position, if you had not come to the church that first Saturday evening, everything would be different. I would be someone else entirely, living some other life." "You believe in fate." "I believe in grace," Katherine said. "I believe that sometimes, when we need it most, we are given exactly what we need, even if we did not know we needed it. I needed you, Kade. I needed this life, these children, this home. I just did not know it until I found it." "I needed you too," he said quietly. "I was dead inside when you arrived, just going through the motions, waiting for my life to be over. You brought me back to life, Katherine. You gave me reasons to hope and dream and try again." They returned to the ranch rejuvenated, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The children were growing. Matthew, now 20, was increasingly taking over the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for management and innovation. Sarah, at 17, was courting a young man from a neighboring ranch, a good boy who treated her with respect and affection. Daniel, 15, was talking about becoming a veterinarian, fascinated by animal health and welfare. And little Grace, at 9, was everyone's darling, with Katherine's gift for music and Kade's steady temperament. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding to include more land and more cattle. Kade hired additional help, building a larger bunkhouse to accommodate the men who worked for him. He had a reputation throughout Utah as a fair employer and skilled rancher. People sought his advice on breeding stock and land management. He served on the town council, helping guide Marysvale's continued growth. Katherine's influence extended beyond the church. She had trained dozens of singers over the years, and several had gone on to perform professionally in Salt Lake City and beyond. She took pride in their success, seeing it as validation of her mother's teachings passed on to a new generation. The church choir was renowned throughout the state, and they were invited to perform at special events and celebrations. In 1908, Sarah married her young man in a ceremony that filled the church to overflowing. Katherine sang at her daughter's wedding, her voice as beautiful as ever, though now it carried the depth that only comes from a life fully lived. Watching Sarah take her vows, Katherine saw herself 23 years earlier, young and hopeful and embarking on a journey into the unknown. But Sarah's path would be easier in many ways. She had grown up on the ranch, knew what to expect, and was marrying a man she had known since childhood. Still, Katherine wept with joy and nostalgia, remembering her own wedding day and the leap of faith she had taken in marrying a man she barely knew. It had worked out better than she ever could have imagined. She prayed the same would be true for her daughter. Grandchildren followed in rapid succession. Sarah and her husband gave them 2 grandsons in quick succession. Matthew married a school teacher from Provo and brought her to the ranch, where she proved as capable and hardworking as Katherine had been. Daniel went away to study veterinary medicine, something that was only possible because of the prosperity the ranch had achieved. Grace continued to bloom, her singing voice maturing into something truly exceptional. As Katherine entered her 50s, she felt the weight of years in ways she had not before. Her hair, once a rich brown, was now thoroughly gray. Her hands, scarred by decades of work, ached on cold mornings, but she was content in ways that transcended physical comfort. She had lived fully and well, loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. Kade aged too, his hair silver and his face deeply lined, but he remained vigorous and active. He still worked the ranch daily, though he left more of the heavy lifting to younger men. He doted on his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope and treat animals with respect. And he still looked at Katherine with the same love and wonder he had shown on their wedding day, as if he could not quite believe his good fortune. In 1915, Grace graduated from a music conservatory in Salt Lake City and returned home to take over the church choir from her mother. Katherine stepped back with relief and pride, pleased to see her legacy in such capable hands. She still sang solos on special occasions, but her voice, while still beautiful, no longer had the range and power of her youth. She did not mind. She had done what she came to do, brought music and joy to a frontier town, raised children and grandchildren, built a life worth living. One Sunday in the spring of 1918, Katherine stood in the church where she had first sung 35 years before. The building had been expanded and improved over the years, but the bones were the same. The same sunlight streamed through the windows, now stained glass donated by a wealthy congregation member. The same sense of community and faith permeated the space. Grace stood at the front directing the choir, her voice rising above the others in perfect pitch. Katherine sat next to Kade in the second row, their usual spot since Grace had taken over. His hand found hers, warm and familiar. She squeezed it gently, and he turned to look at her. In his eyes, she saw everything they had been to each other, all the years and experiences that had woven their lives together into something beautiful and strong. After the service, they walked slowly to the wagon, greeting friends and family along the way. The grandchildren ran ahead, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Matthew helped his wife into their wagon while Sarah's family prepared for their own journey home. "Can you believe it has been 35 years?" Katherine asked as Kade helped her into the seat. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," he said, climbing up beside her. Other times it feels like you have always been here, like there was never a time before you. I feel the same way." They rode home in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after decades of companionship. The ranch came into view, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and partnership. The house stood strong against the mountains, smoke rising from the chimney where the stove was kept burning to ward off the lingering chill of early spring. Inside, Katherine prepared supper while Kade read the newspaper. It was a routine they had followed for years, comfortable and familiar. After they ate, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Kade asked. "When I brought you to see the ranch before we were married. I remember everything about that day. How nervous I was, how beautiful everything looked in the golden light, how you told me I was heaven to you. You still are. Every single day, Katherine, you are still my heaven." She leaned against him, content and grateful. "And you are mine." The years continued to pass gently. Daniel returned to the area with his degree and opened a veterinary practice that served ranchers throughout the region. He married a widow with 2 children and added 3 more of his own. Grace married a musician she met in Salt Lake City, and they settled in Marysvale, where he taught at the growing school and played piano for the church services. Katherine and Kade slowed down as their 60s turned into their 70s, but they remained active and engaged with their community. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1934 with a party that filled the church and spilled out into the street. Their children and grandchildren came from across Utah to honor them, sharing stories and singing songs and expressing gratitude for the foundation of love and faith that Katherine and Kade had built. Katherine sang that day, her voice thin and wavering but still beautiful. She chose Amazing Grace, the same hymn she had sung on her first Sunday in Marysvale 51 years before. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the church. Kade stood and took her hand, pulling her close. "I heard heaven in your voice that day," he told the assembled crowd. "And every day since, she has brought heaven into my life. I am the most blessed man who ever lived." The community agreed that the lonely rancher and the singer from St. Louis had indeed found heaven together in the rugged beauty of Utah. Their story became legend in Marysvale, told and retold as an example of how love could flourish even in the hardest soil, how 2 wounded souls could heal each other and build something lasting and true. Katherine passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1938 at the age of 79. She had been singing earlier that evening, her voice weak but sweet, leading a hymn at the church's Christmas service. She went home with Kade, ate supper, and kissed him good night as she had done for 54 years. In the morning, he found her gone, a slight smile on her face as if she had heard something beautiful in her dreams. Kade mourned her deeply, but without the desperate grief that had consumed him after Rachel's death. He had had more than 50 years with Katherine, years filled with love and purpose and joy. She had given him children and grandchildren, a full life, and memories enough to last until his own end. He lived another 2 years, cared for by his children, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He spent his days sitting on the porch of the ranch house, looking at the mountains and remembering. When visitors asked him about his life, he always came back to the same story. "She came to sing at the Sunday service," he would say, his old eyes distant with memory. "This lonely rancher heard heaven in her voice, and she stayed and built heaven right here with me. That is the story of my life. That is all that matters." Kade passed in the spring of 1940, and his children buried him next to Katherine in the churchyard cemetery. The entire town turned out for the funeral, 3 generations of people whose lives had been touched by the rancher and his singer. Grace sang at the service, her voice carrying across the cemetery, a tribute to her mother's legacy. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Matthew's line. The house stood for generations, a landmark and a reminder of what two people could build when they found each other at exactly the right moment. The church continued to thrive, its choir still renowned for its beauty, trained by singers who had learned from Grace, who had learned from Katherine. Years later, when people asked about the history of Marysvale, they always mentioned the rancher and the singer. The lonely man who had lost everything and the grieving woman who came west looking for a fresh start. How they had found each other in a small frontier church. How her voice had awakened something in him he thought was dead forever. How they had built a life together that became the stuff of legend. Their great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story, understanding that they came from love, from courage, from two people who had taken a chance on each other when it would have been easier to stay safe and alone. The story was passed down through generations, a testament to the power of love to heal and transform, to the importance of taking chances, of following your heart even when it leads you to unexpected places. The old church, where Katherine first sang, still stood a century later, lovingly maintained by the congregation. In the small museum the town established, visitors could see photographs of Katherine and Kade, young and hopeful on their wedding day, older and weathered but still clearly in love in their later years. They could read letters Katherine had written to her friends back east, describing her new life with wonder and gratitude. The most treasured artifact was a recording made in the 1920s, when the technology first became available. Katherine was in her 60s, her voice no longer at its peak, but still beautiful. She sang Amazing Grace a cappella, each note clear and pure, carrying all the faith and love and hard-won wisdom of a life fully lived. People who listened to that recording, even a century later, understood why Kade Garrett had heard heaven in her voice. It transcended mere technical skill, reaching something deeper and more essential. The story of the lonely rancher and the singer became more than just a local legend. It became a reminder that love could find you in the most unexpected places, that grief did not have to be the end of the story, that two broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful. It became a testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the power of music to move souls, to the importance of community and faith and taking chances. In Marysvale, Utah, the legacy of Katherine and Kade lived on long after they were gone. In the church choir that still sang with passion and skill, in the ranch that still operated under family ownership, in the stories told to children about taking chances on love, in the way the town came together to support its own. Their love story became part of the fabric of the place, woven into its history and identity. And on Sunday mornings, when the church bells rang out across the valley and voices rose in hymns of praise, old-timers swore they could still hear it. That one perfect voice rising above all the others, clear and sweet and full of joy. Katherine Anders, the singer from St. Louis, who came west to start over and found heaven instead. And the lonely rancher who heard that heaven in her voice and asked her to stay, building a life together that blessed everyone it touched. Their graves in the churchyard cemetery bore simple markers with their names and dates, but also a single shared inscription chosen by their children. She came to sing, he came to listen. Together they created heaven on earth. And in the end, that was the truest summary of their story. Two lonely souls finding each other in a small frontier town, building a life together through hard work and deep love, creating something that lasted far beyond their own years. A legacy of love and music and faith that enriched everyone. It touched and proved that sometimes, just sometimes, the best things in life come when you least expect them, when you take a chance on a stranger with sad eyes and a hopeful heart. The sun still set over the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, just as it had that first evening when Kade brought Katherine to see his ranch. The church still stood, welcoming worshippers each Sunday. The ranch still operated, cattle grazing in pastures that had been carefully tended for generations. And the story lived on, told and retold, a reminder that love could flourish even in the hardest soil, that two hearts could heal each other, that heaven was not just some distant place but something that could be built right here on earth by people brave enough to try. Katherine had come to Marysvale seeking nothing more than a way to survive her grief. Instead, she had found love and purpose and a home. She had brought music to a place that needed it desperately, raised children and grandchildren who carried on her legacy, and loved a good man with all her heart for more than 50 years. In the process, she had transformed not just her own life but the entire community, proving that one person with courage and faith could make a lasting difference. Kade had been a lonely rancher, hollowed out by grief, going through the motions of life without really living. Katherine's voice had awakened something in him he thought was lost forever, and her love had given him back his future. Together, they had built something that mattered, something that lasted, something that continued to inspire long after they were gone. Their story was simple in its essence. She came to sing. He came to listen. They fell in love. They built a life. But in that simplicity lay profound truth about what matters most in life. Not wealth or status or fame, but love and connection and the courage to begin again when everything seems lost. Not perfection, but persistence. Not ease, but meaning. Not safety, but the willingness to take risks for something worth having. And so the story ended as all good stories should, with love triumphant and a legacy that endured. The lonely rancher and the singer found their heaven together in the wild beauty of Utah territory. And in doing so, they showed everyone around them what was possible when two people committed fully to each other and to building something meaningful together. Their love story became part of the landscape, as permanent and beautiful as the mountains themselves. A reminder that some things, if tended with care and devotion, could last forever.